Jessica Clift, Principal City Planner for TfL.
I'm Mohammed Gajir. I am TfL Engineering.
Good morning, Mia Skajanti from Savills Planning, the agent on behalf of Bellway and Peabody.
Richard Burrow from Peabody.
Good morning, Alex Christopher from Turley, representing the Arch Company.
Phoebe Juggins from Your Tribe.
Good morning, Nick Lawrence from Your Tribe as well.
Hello, Jordana Malik from the Renewal Group.
Thank you. Paula Carney from Carney Sweeney, Town Planning Consultant, acting on behalf of the Renewal Group. And just to clarify, it's in relation to the allocated Surrey Canal MEL.
Bruno Moore, Head of Town Planning for Sainsbury's Supermarkets.
Good morning, Sean McGrath from the BSP supporting Sainsbury's.
Thank you. Right, turning to the agenda, we'll start with the vision and the key spatial objectives. So I note there's a representation from TfL regarding cycle hire wanting to be an objective as well. I was just wondering what the council's view was that. TfL have suggested a couple of additional objectives, 10 and 11, in their representation about expanding cycle hire along the River Thames and Deptford Creek side. And I was just going to ask the council: is this a reasonable suggestion? Is it an objective? Could it be part of placemaking principles? What would the council's view be?
I mean, I certainly think the council would be supportive of the principles. I have to carefully look at the wording and consider whether it is a kind of strategic objective. But I'm sure that we may be able to look at the existing objectives and think about whether that can be incorporated in appropriately within one of those. So I wonder if we can take that away and look to see where that's best placed.
Of course, thank you. So policy LNA1, the North Area Place Principles. I don't have any further questions on this, but I believe there's a modification in relation to this policy, if I can turn to the council.
Yes, if I'm reading PD 11 correctly, the council is proposing a modification at paragraph 15.91, small 2, introducing text that states development should be designed to protect the amenity of residential properties, taking into account the theatres. My apologies, that I'm reading the wrong modification. If inspectors could indulge me for a moment. My apologies for the delay. That there appear to be two that sort of roughly fit into that sort of opening section of the Lewisham North area neighbourhood and place policies. Firstly, modification MO 98, which is purely a spelling correction, correcting the word vehicles. Modification MO 99 introduces, and that's to paragraph 15.12, introduces the acronym for creative, or abbreviation for creative enterprise zones. Those are the two that I've been able to find. If I'm missing one.
Do we still have MO 113, which is relating to figure 15.2? Because that's the North Area Key diagram, so it sort of features in the plan at this stage.
So my apologies. I won't offer an excuse. Yes, reference MO 113, figure 15.2. So this is to, as it states, map identify the confirmed safeguarded wharf boundary under figure 15.2.
Thank you. Moving on to policy LNA2, the New Cross Road A2 corridor policy. So criterion D refers to new transport infrastructure and public realm improvements. So in terms of the progress on this, is this something that TfL might be able to help us with?
Yes, thank you. In response to question 18.3, we at the moment are obviously working on the Bakerloo line extension, undertaking our feasibility studies, looking at improvements at that site in the New Cross Road A2 corridor, primarily focusing on New Cross Gate. During that time, while we're undertaking our works, we obviously, as mentioned at Matter 7 and yesterday, currently have Secretary of State safeguarding directions in place. But until that time, the BLE can come forward. London Overground on the East London line would look to improve capacity there as well. But that is as far as we have in terms of our improvements we're aware of anyway from a BLE perspective.
Thank you. Councillor.
Yes, relating specifically to the A2 corridor. So there was a piece of work which TfL and Lewisham did, which, forgive me in terms of the stages of work, but I think it was pre-feasibility stage, I think it's called, at TfL. This was before the pandemic, and we were looking at effectively public transport improvements and public realm improvements along the corridor, which would then link to the New Cross Road improvements. I think it's important to say that there is this, whilst this is a strategic corridor project, there is no site allocation that is specifically dependent on the improvements being made in a similar way, for example, to the realignment of the South Circular. This is simply about improving the public transport, cycling and walking environment along that route. My understanding is that obviously we were progressing and we got to the point of the pre-feasibility stage report, and then essentially world events happened and changes to investment priorities happened, etc. So there's no further work being progressed at this stage. It's still a key priority for the council and for TfL, but there's no planned programmed work for that, other than, as my colleague says, around the kind of BLE station around New Cross Gate.
Thank you. And in terms of proposed modifications for policy LNA 2,
There are three that I've been able to identify. They are in order within submission document PD11, MO103, and that relates to policy LNA 02 Part C, and it introduces the new words after safe and accessible walking routes and cycleways and their supporting infrastructure. The next proposed modification is at reference MO104. That relates to supporting text paragraph 15.34, development guidelines, and it seeks to include a new subparagraph which states development proposals in proximity to the safeguarded. My apologies. Again, it's the site allocation. That's it.
thank you. So turning over the page to policy LNA3, Creative Enterprise Zone. And our question 18.5 relates to criterion D, little a. Is it sufficiently flexible to ensure that the policy is effective? To the council, please.
As per the council's response to MIQ 18.5, the council believes that I'll go straight to the conclusions. I think to paraphrase, the council does believe that the policy is sufficiently flexible. I will highlight that it considers that the opportunities provided under new Class E brackets G will complement and enhance the role of the Creative Enterprise Zone. And it is anticipated that they will enable the conditions for these sectors to continue to prosper over the long term. Taking a step back, I should emphasise that the council considers that the opportunities offered under Class E brackets G, and I suspect that includes small 1, 2, and 3 of that subset, are compatible and complementary to the types of uses that could take place within the Creative Enterprise Zone. The council would refer to its evidence that's set out in, I believe, documents EB24 and LC1, which specifically speaks to the often referred servicing the services type industries. And I believe in our response we speak to the types of creative or examples of the types of creative servicing the service type industries that could locate to the Creative Enterprise Zone, and how they would sort of fit in with the opportunities offered by under Class E brackets G. So to summarise, yes, it is.
You'll note that we've had a representation from Artworks Creekside, which are a little concerned about whether that's a realistic criterion and whether it would preclude redevelopment. So hence the question about flexibility. Artworks Creekside have suggested alternative wording in their representation. I wonder if the council's like to offer a view on the alternative wording, please.
I believe we did provide a response to that through the Regulation 19. I think in the spirit of positivity that the examination hearing sessions have taken, I would offer to sort of take that away and review it again. But I do believe that the policy is sufficiently flexible. I think that is a position that the council can take. I think the possible issues that you've raised just now, Inspector Bust, around the possibilities that redevelopment might be stifled. I believe we did discuss those within the broad context of unintended circumstances during week 1. I think they are one of the tensions that is inherent within our planning system across a range of development types, and indeed I think ultimately as these things sometimes do boil down, it will be a case of judgment by decision takers at the coalface, and an analysis of the specific circumstances that affect the site, and certainly in my experience from plan making and decision taking, factors such as companies or organisations that call the borough their home are taken into account, and their sort of the borough's ability to accommodate their needs is a consideration that's taken into account by decision takers, and taken very seriously, I should add. So I think the council hears what the respondent is saying. We respect the fact that they're a business that calls Lewisham their home. We'd want to work with them and other businesses of that type to ensure that we could find them, find a suitable solution through the decision-taking process. But there is only so far that the policy can go. I think that's all I would have to say. I'm not sure if David wants to come in.
I think if I may, obviously we had a slightly similar conversation in the previous matter. So if you would permit us to take that away and have a look at that holistically with that previous matter, and then come to a conclusion on the, I think it's to do with kind of unintended consequences, and it's certainly not our intention to restrict creative organisations to redevelop and expand their premises. So let's take that away and we can work out some wording for that.
Thank you. That'd be helpful. So in terms of how would the creative industries zone located within a SIL be managed? I think the renewal group had also suggested if the extent of the CEZ was shown on figure 8.12 in relation to policy EC4. Is that something that the council have considered, how to illustrate the creative industries zone?
I must confess I don't fully understand the question. Pardon my possible stupidity.
Well, I'm wondering whether the renewal group would like to refer us back to their representation.
Yeah, sorry, I've just picked up the comment, and I think we were saying if the extent of the CZ was shown on figure 8.12 in relation to policy EC4, that would be helpful. Unfortunately, I'm struggling to get onto the internet today, so I can't bring it up on my screen to assist any further, unfortunately.
I think this relates to the hierarchy of employment designations. So I think it is a fair point. I think we'll take that one away. I think it may very well be useful actually to put it onto the figure in some shape or form. I don't think it will be a shaded area, but maybe a boundary within that plan. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Thank you for that. So moving on to policy LNA4, the Thames policy area and Deptford Creek side. My only question in relation into this one, again, Artworks Creekside representation, they were concerned about the duplication regarding the need to consider heritage assets. And I'm just wondering whether that in part C, talking about the industrial heritage of the area, is it necessary to refer to heritage again when we've got heritage policies within the local plan? Is there a special reason that heritage gets a mention in relation to policy L and A4? To the council, please.
There's no specific reason, just to, flag up, particularly looking at Deptford Creekside, obviously there is a kind of an industrial heritage there, so we felt that it was important to flag that up. But it is a fair point that it is covered in other policies, but I do think it's useful for this policy to flag up, particularly given the industrial heritage of some of these areas, and just pinpoint to users that may be a consideration, and then they can refer to the heritage policies that we have.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any modifications to policy LNA4, please?
Mercifully, we do not.
Okay, in terms of those 4 policies, is there anything else anyone wants to raise in relation to the policies before we move on to the site allocations? No? Thank you. Okay, let's turn to the site allocations. We're going to start with LNA 11. So that's the former Hatcham Works on New Cross Road. So I'm going to come to the council first in terms of the background to this site allocation, how it was identified and the options that were considered, please.
So this is a site that was identified in the London SHLA. It was also identified as a development site within the New Cross Gates Area Framework 2019. The landowner has expressed interest in developing this site. We've also had a number of pre-application discussions with them in the past. I think obviously we have discussed this in previous matters, but it is subject to Secretary of State safeguarding direction for the Bakerloo line extension. The council has used the New Cross gate area framework and the design-led approach that was done through that process to identify the indicative capacities that effectively results in 800 net residential units, approximately 7,500 gross employment floor space and 10,000 gross main town centre floor space, with the view of re-providing a supermarket in the future. As we'll go on to discuss, obviously the safeguarding direction from the Secretary of State means that this site will not be developed until the final years of the plan. So the anticipated delivery for the BLE, and apologies, I don't know why this doesn't stick in my head, but I believe it's 2038 in terms of opening or completed. And therefore, we have anticipated within the anticipated delivery to be years 14 to 16 to reflect that.
And in terms of the pre-applications you mentioned, how far have we got with that process?
Well, the pre-application was some years ago, and I'm sure participants and colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but this was prior to the Secretary of State direction. The pre-application discussions were always prefaced with the view that this could be the station location, and prefaced with the premise that this could be the TfL's preferred location for the construction site. So we made it very clear that that the pre-application discussions were predicated on that view. I think since we've obviously had the direction, there's been no pre-application discussion.
Thank you. Sainsbury's.
Yeah, just an point of clarification. Whilst all the pre-application discussions took place within the context of the BLE line, we went as far as submitting a planning application on the site which was registered. So we went beyond pre-application phase.
Yes, of course. Forgive me. Yes.
And just in terms of that planning application, did that cover the whole site? What were the details behind that, please?
It was for the whole site. It was for mixed-use redevelopment, a replacement supermarket, and in the region of 1,200 dwellings.
I think it is worth just highlighting that, Inspector. It was 1,200 dwellings. The allocation is for 800. In the previous iteration, I think in the Reg 18, it was 900, so it's actually gone down to the Regulation 19. But Sainsbury's have gone through the work to know they can get 1,200 on there, and also, and I won't keep going on about it, but the EIA talks about delivery of 1,000 units at New Cross. So I do think it needs to be looked at. And I suppose related to that, and going back, looking at delivery times, obviously the plan was drafted, and it says delivery of houses between 6 to 10 years, and then 11 to 15. But if we're talking about 2038 now for the Bakerloo line to be open, it's obviously going to push back. I mean, that's 14 years, so it's probably going to be pushed back beyond the 15 years. But by the time you actually get houses delivered, and that's not, taking into account any slippage that might happen, which I would say is probably likely. So I do think it needs to be thought about in that context.
Yes.
Yes, just to clarify, so the revised, we accept the point about the trajectory. So the revised trajectory that we've provided with the examination does push that back to years 14 through to 16, with the anticipation of the Bakerloo line extension being completed in 2038. With regard to the figures, obviously the figures are indicative. We've had obviously many conversations and debates about this. We were not satisfied with the conclusion of the pre-application discussions. We had some considerable concern about the scale of the buildings that was being proposed at that stage, which was a number of years back. Since then, obviously, we've had the tall building study work done, which then puts on maximum heights, which we believe are appropriate for that area and this particular site. I don't believe there's been any representation objecting to that tall building work and the building heights suggested, but the application would far exceed those building heights. So we think the indicative capacities of around 800 net residential units is, a reasonable net indicative capacity for the site. Forgive me, in terms of, the application was submitted quite a while back. I believe the application was withdrawn, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's correct. The planning application was withdrawn, but it was registered.
And in terms of the constraints to deliver the site, what needs to be overcome with the site, and can those constraints be overcome?
The significant constraint is obviously the safeguarding and the use of the site for the main construction compound for the Bakerloo line extension and the launching site for the two bores that will construct the tunnel. That will inevitably delay the delivery of the site, as we've discussed. Other than that, we're not aware of any kind of significant physical constraints on the site which would impede development.
In terms of delivery, is there anything from TfL that you want to add at this point in the context of the delivery of the site? Yes, in the delivery of the site.
I mean, in terms of housing, TfL don't have any views on that. That's a matter for the local planning authority. Obviously, we would work with all partners at that time to try and bring the site forward as and when it can. I should just note our programme as it stands at the moment would be to get planning permission, or TWAO in that case, by 2030. So in this scenario, Sainsbury's could still operate at the site until time such as that. And then obviously during construction, it would have to close based on how we envisage using the site at the moment. And that is a period of 8 years, so to 2038. And it's just maybe worth noting that TfL doesn't negate maybe a supermarket going back out on that site. But again, this is just a matter for the local planning authority to determine at such time.
Please.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on that point. I mean, obviously the council acknowledges that the site's identification as the main construction and tunnelling site and the closure of the supermarket will have a significant impact on New Cross Gate. It is something that we have carefully considered. And what I would say is that we've also pushed TfL quite hard through this process before the Secretary of State direction to look at alternatives, to look at alternative sites for the station box. We explored the option of the Goodwood, the neighbouring site, the Goodwood Road site. We explored the options of alternative site compounds and launching the tunnels elsewhere. So I think there was quite a robust, certainly from council's perspective, and again, you know, we pushed them very hard on this. We accept that there will be an impact, but the significant benefits that the Bakerloo line will bring, Lewisham finally being connected to the tube network, fundamentally outweighs those you know, short-term impacts in our view. That's the council's position.
Thank you. Sainsbury's.
Thank you. I think that's our main concern. I think it was interesting because the actual allocation doesn't mention about the replacement supermarket being provided on site. And I think if the council are happy with that, I think that would be a useful amendment. But I do think it's one of the questions that was asked about has anyone considered the impact? And I do think that has been overlooked. I mean, we've done a lot of work about what the impact on New Cross Gate District Centre will be, and it's in the evidence. I mean, the 70% negative impact is a massive impact on the centre. And in the EIA document, they talk about, because there's a bit of a food store desert there, talks about during that construction period having TfL providing free buses to take people to food stores elsewhere. So it is a serious consideration, not only the loss of jobs, the anchor of the centre, but travelling, but also their local jobs. 90% of the staff who work there live locally, so there'll be a massive impact. And 8 years in planning terms doesn't seem very long, but it will be when people are displaced from their jobs. And I think that's the concern we have. And it's not so much about the station being there. And I know it's probably, we've talked about this, it's about the safeguarding and the tunnel works. And we have provided TfL, and the council are aware, alternatives. Goodwood Road has been an alternative station site, and the Wearside Depot has been an alternative tunnelling work. The technical work we've undertaken shows they're better locations. So, I mean, I assume, and I hope it wasn't as simplistic as this, but someone saw a big site that's flat to the car park and said, that's a good tunnelling location. But I've not seen anything that sort of goes beyond that, because there are, and it is in the evidence, the technical work we've done saying it's not a good place to have the tunnelling works because you can't get access to the railway line there, but further down the track you can, and you can get access to sidings. But I know we're not sort of talking about that now. It's just concentrating on the actual allocation. I do think it would be helpful to look at the housing numbers that could be delivered, because I think if we're saying the Bakerloo line extension is going to open the door to a lot more housing delivery, I think it is bizarre going from 900 to 800, and we've got had an application. So I think we should look at 1,200 units on there, or at least say a minimum of 800. And I think we should refer to a food store being re-provided on the site.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to TfL. If there's anything that you want to pick up in terms of the technical point about the location of the site, please, and obviously the evidence that Sainsbury's that you've seen, please.
Yes, ma'am. I'll pass on to my colleague, Mo, who can answer that better for you.
I'm going to talk about some of the site selection, that we looked at and why some of the construction things that we considered. They are largely dealt with in the 2019 public consultation, which we undertook, which is in the public domain. So we didn't submit them all again for this. And if I go on too long about the engineering, which I want to do, please stop me. But But we were essentially looking to use a type of tunneling machine called a slurry machine. It needs a certain amount of land and treatment works and space for things like segments for the plant that takes the muck out of, this is far too much detail, out of a slurry, turns it into cakes and put it onto the train. The other thing that we were keen, and we've been driven by previous work, is that not to take all of the traffic by road. So we were looking, recent works we've done, we've been led, so if we look at the NLE, if we look at Silvertown, those benefited from being able to use the river for transit. We didn't have opportunities on the line to do that for the Bakerloo line extension. So to do that, we were looking at railheads. The benefit of the Hatcham Park site is that it used, as a function of the fact that it used to be railway land, it sits adjacent to the railway. It has land at the level, and we looked to put sidings in which were off the railway. So it gave us the ability to have a pair of sidings off the railway that we could then bring trains onto and off of and still allow transport to go. That would allow us to bring things like segments in, take muck out. I note the point around the Wearside site. One of the which Sainsbury proposed, which is access through a far more residential road, only really has rail access. It's adjacent to the railway, but doesn't have the ability to bring sidings on. It's also a much smaller site. So when we were looking, when we think about how we get elements such as the TBMs in, the segments, tunnel boring machines in, the segments, the muck, we didn't believe there would be enough space or the logistics to actually make that site work. I think the other thing that we try and ensure is that we have it's not a very big, it's a small stockpile, a number of days of things like segments and muck in case there's an issue. There is no leeway potentially on that Wearside site. So in terms of trying to find somewhere on the line of the extension, that's where we went to. I think within the public consultation, we also talked about two other sites. We talked about Hither Green and we talked about Catford Bridge as potential sites. Both of those introduced approximately about 1.5 kilometres of extra twin tunnel route, which is not the cheapest, but also has implications in terms of the extra power, the extra segments, the extra muck that we have to take somewhere, which kind of led us to look along the route somewhere. Within more central London, there are few places. Starting at Lambeth North, there wasn't many places you could look at. So sort of along the route when we looked at places where we could go, especially when we're starting to look at the logistics of not just having transport by road, the options were few, which led us to this site, which still connects with Network Rail and Network Rail land to the north.
Sainsbury's, please.
There's little, sorry, there's little slack in the system at New Cross Gate. And I think I did read somewhere that TfL are proposing to increase from 16 to 18 trains an hour, which would mean there'll be even less slack in the future. So what it would mean if you were going to use the railway to take muck off the site, you'd have to do it late at night, and obviously it will have to go through residential areas. And that was one of the reasons that we thought it's probably not that good a site. And the reality, trying to get trains running through the night to take muck off the site is going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. And I think in the technical evidence, it does talk about a site at Hither Green where the same thing happened and they weren't able to run trains during the night because of the noise impact. So I do think there are other options, and I don't know if they have been looked at seriously by TfL. I mean, we haven't really had conversation. I know Sainsbury's haven't really had conversations about tunnelling work site, and that's why we did the technical work to say, is this the right location? And we haven't really had it engaged beyond that, I don't think, to say, it might not be the best location.
I didn't see which Toblerone went up first. Mr. Syme, would you like to
I think it
respond,
was
and then
I think it
TfL?
was TFLs, but I'm going to take the liberty to kind of jump in there, given it's the Lewisham local plan. You know, clearly there's a dispute between the landowner and the infrastructure provider, TFL. I just want to reassure the examination that if there was a better site, the council would have pushed for it, and we pushed TFL all the way to demonstrate that this site was the most appropriate location. We understand that there is going to be impact. TfL have done the work, we've seen the work, to look at the options, to test the options. Now, you know, we can debate this and spend the next hour and a half debating it, but ultimately there's a Secretary of State direction which safeguards this site, and the local plan reflects the safeguarding. I'm not entirely sure how much more we can go beyond that. The site is a developable site, but it is safeguarded for the delivery of the Bakerloo line extension, and the local plan then reflects that.
Did TfL want to add anything to that?
You'll potentially forgive me for indulging the engineering element again, but just to answer a couple of points. One, we note that it's a busy part of central London in terms of rail traffic. Everywhere is. There are very few places where you can find many routes that aren't busy. And that was one of the reasons that we're looking for the ability to put down sidings which are off the railway, so that you can bring in trains and take them out at quieter times and load them and unload them, not at speed, which would potentially be put a lot of stress on the system. I think the other point I would make with reference to the comment about Hither Green, when we were looking at typical freight train sizes, they're typically about 300 metres. When we looked at things like, when we were challenged about could we do something there, and we were looking to do something there, the siding lengths we were getting there were suboptimal, as well as having, 1.5 kilometres of extra twin tunnels to get there. So it was, there were reasons. I was just going back on that point, but I appreciate this is quite a narrow engineering response to accept a planning argument.
Thank you. I'm just going back to Sainsbury's, and then I'm going to move on into some other questions.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if there is the evidence available, it would be useful, because I'm sure Sainsbury's haven't seen any evidence. So it would be really useful if, maybe not in, you know, it might not need to be part of the evidence base for this document, but it would be very helpful for Sainsbury's to be able to see the evidence. If I assume it is there, and it should be fairly easy to provide for them.
I think perhaps a conversation outside of the session, just to share whatever information you've got that you can share, and that might help Sainsbury's in understanding where you've come from, where you've got to, and but coming back to the allocation. So obviously it's an operational site with Sainsbury's on there currently trading, with employment in that area. So what's the current retail floor space for that store, please?
So the current retail floor space, you forgive me, this is old school, so it's square footage, but it's gross area of the store and this is just Sainsbury's rather than the retail units to the front of the store, to the front of the site, but it's 63,618 gross, with a net sales area of 36,058.
And in the allocation, we've got 10,000 square meters, so back in metric, of gross town
I
centre.
can do the conversion, it's all right.
So in terms of the, where I'm trying to get to is what the existing is in relation to the proposed, and is there a difference? And it might be to the council.
Sorry, I'm trying to do the conversion in my head there in terms of what you said. My understanding is that there is a small net loss of total main town centre floor space of 265 square metres. And then there is a net gain of employment floor space within the area of 7,500 square metres. Again, in terms of the employment floor space, what we were considering there is the designation of the creative enterprise zone, but also the connection to Goldsmiths University immediately adjacent to the site, and also the inherent demand within that area for workspace, which is why we've included some significant employment floor space within the site. Once again, just to clarify that these are indicative capacities, and obviously, whilst it's reflective of the New Cross Gate area framework, obviously it will require a kind of design-led approach when an application is developed.
So just in terms of the figures, are we talking net or gross?
When we talk about the figures, we talk about gross.
So in terms of the time scale, I think it was mentioned that there was Sainsbury's would have to close for 8 years, and in terms of the impact on Sainsbury's, would Sainsbury's like to comment on that?
I think if we were removed from the site for 8 years, it'd be very difficult to come back and re-establish the supermarket on the site subsequent to that. There would clearly be, I think there would clearly be a gap in the market with regards to a supermarket on the site. But assuming that the site had been compulsory purchased in the meantime, I think that there would be significant barriers to re-establish a supermarket on the site.
Thank you. And I think you also mentioned about if the allocation included reference to a supermarket in there in one of your previous comments.
I think just because of we know the impact of taking the supermarket away, the impact on New Cross Gate, New Cross District Centre is enormous. I think it's 70 something, between 70 and 90%. So I think there should be something there to have a food store back, and whether that's Sainsbury's or another operator, I do think it would be vital to have that on that site, just to support the town centre.
Thank you. Just to come back to the council on this, what's expected within this allocation in relation
Yes,
to
that's. I think that's an oversight on our part, because there are obviously other allocations where we have existing supermarkets where we have made reference to the re-provision of supermarkets. So yes, we can add that to the site allocation.
Thank you. Sainsbury's.
Thank you for that. That's very useful. Can I also add, there's also examples elsewhere in London where we have redeveloped stores. So at 9 Elms, our new store there is next door to the new Northern Line extension underground that was part of our site previously. So there is precedent within London to actually continue to trade. We did close for a period of about 12 months there, but we're able to occupy a new store and accommodate a station on the same site at the moment. I think the issue here is the fact that the whole site goes for a construction work site is a problem, but anything that the policy could do to reflect a possible phasing with regards to accommodating all needs on the site would be very useful.
So in terms of how the site would be delivered and how it would be phased, is there any ability for the site to remain trading, or is it the whole site that's required? TfL can possibly help us with this detail.
As it stands, the whole site would be redeveloped and used as a construction site. And again, this is kind of coming down to having large infrastructure going into there, such as the sidings for the railway and other matters which my colleague Mo's just described and set out to you.
Anything else from the council?
Nothing further to add, no.
Sainsbury's.
Just thinking out loud. I suppose we do have to think, don't we? If the Bakerloo line doesn't come forward and the safeguarding falls away, and say if Sainsbury's still own the site, and in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, whenever that is, and they did want to redevelop it, then they would want the food store, as per the application they did submit.
Right, I have no further questions on that site. If there's Sainsbury's have a further point.
It's just about the name of the site. I know you asked a question about it, and I've seen the council's response. I do think it says that the Hatcham Ironworks, that's why it's called the former Hatcham site. I think Sainsbury's, all Sainsbury's want it to be called is New Cross Gate Retail Park, which I think is what TfL call it. I did look, and I think the Hatcham Ironworks site were not even on that site. I looked on the internet, it took me 5 minutes. It was between Pender Street, I think it was. Pomeroy Street and Kender Street is where the Hatcham Ironworks sites were. So I do think, we should think about calling it a name that reflects the use at the moment, and possibly the use for another 10 years.
I think we have some modifications. Did we have a modification? And there was one in relation to the name, wasn't there?
Indeed, there is. Would you like me to speak to that? Yes, so there are two modifications in order. The first is within the submitted document PD11. The second is within the addendum published and submitted this morning, as per the similar addendum that was published and submitted yesterday. So in order, modification MO252, and that indeed does relate to the title of the site allocation, and it now reads former Hatcham Works brackets Retail Park, New Cross Road. The second proposed modification, reference MO306, as per those submitted to the examination yesterday, that adjusts the projected housing land supply trajectory for the site. I believe my colleagues spoke to that earlier. Thank you.
If I may, just in terms of that modification, I think the name Hatcham Works obviously does resonate with the public, but I do accept that this is a historic kind of loose connection. I'm more than happy to change it to New Cross Retail Park to reflect A, its location, and B, what it's being currently used at, you know, if that's acceptable.
I think former Hatcham Works Retail Park is sort of trying to be a compromise, but in terms of what it's perhaps more known as commonly is what you see on site. So I think a modification to the modification and actually make it New Cross Gate Retail Park to sort of reflect current. That would be more effective, and I think for the lifetime of the plan as well. Right, I think that concludes this site allocation. Thank you. Let's move on to the next one. So this is LNA SA8, Bermondsey Dive Under. So in terms of the development proposed, looking at its viability and its deliverability within the plan period, if I could just start with the council, please.
In terms of the Bermondsey Dive Under, I think, again, we've had quite a lot of conversation about this site and its potential designation as strategic industrial land. So this was identified in the new Bermondsey Dive Under study in 2019 as a potential opportunity. It is a former work site of the Bermondsey Dive Under, which is a strategic infrastructure project which is now complete. We did look at some work to see how that site could be used in the future, and the council contends that it is an appropriate strategic industrial land location. We have talked previously about the access, etc., and the types of uses that are currently on the site at the moment. And I think there is a general acceptance from GLA that the site would be acceptable as strategic industrial land to compensate for the or the redesignation of 3 sites, which we will go on to talk about, to ELSIS and remove them from the strategic industrial land location. We've looked at the development potential and in a fairly broad mathematical sense, and looked at the percentage of employment floor space across that, and the indicative capacity is 5,264 square metres. Based on that mathematical calculation. I think it's important to say that the site has dual designation. Part is strategic industrial land and part is ELSIS, the local industrial designation, and that covers primarily the arches, and that's effectively reflecting that the council believes that within those arches there might be a wider range of industrial uses that could be accommodated there. I think it's important to say, just in terms of its function, but also its location, it's obviously fairly well contained because of the infrastructure that bounds the site. The arches themselves, obviously, on one side are adjacent to strategic industrial land, which is currently in operation with Network Rail using it for infrastructure upgrades elsewhere. And then the northern arches then back onto employment uses on the ground and mezzanine level of the Silwood Street redevelopment again, which presumably we will go on to talk about.
And in terms of viability for this site, what does the viability assessment conclude?
I don't believe the viability assessment looked at this site specifically, but it is a cleared site. As I said, Network Rail are using it as one of the intended uses of strategic industrial locations at the moment, whilst the council in the future would like to see more intense industrial use and job creating floor space on that site. It is actively being used for strategic industrial land location at the moment.
If I may just add to my colleague's eloquent introduction, I would also refer the inspectors to the work that was undertaken, the additional supplementary employment evidence that was undertaken for submission. I think it's documents, again, EB24 and LC1, they're essentially the same document for other participants, which speaks to the Bermondsey Dive Under site. I would also refer the inspectors to the submitted Bermondsey Dive Under study, which formed part of the council's response to, I believe it was matter 8. And that in particular speaks to the sort of the typologies that could be delivered across the site. The inspectors will remember the discussions during week 1 about railway archway employment sites and the potential opportunities that they offer, and I think it's useful to note, and I'm sure the inspectors have seen this on their sort of travels around the borough, the opportunities that such locations present, specifically for the type of smaller scale employment operations that could locate within this type of ELSIS type site.
In terms of floor space, is there any net change in the floor space compared to the existing? So what's the existing and what's the proposed, and have we got any net change in there, please?
Yes, the existing is 0 because there is no floor space currently on the site. It's a cleared site. So in terms of the indicative capacity, there would be a net gain of 5,264 square metres.
If I could just add to that there is, and without wishing to overcomplicate this, as it was the subject of discussion previously, but particularly around some of the concerns raised by the Greater London Authority in relation to the redesignation of the 3 sites to ELSIS status from SIL. Again, the evidence-based work that I've already referenced does present an analysis of that change, and indeed the conclusion of that analysis is that there is an opportunity to achieve intensification across the Bermondsey Dive under strategic industrial location and ELSIS site. Indeed, I think there is a theoretical gain, the immediate theoretical gain in floor space, but I think within the sort of the GLA's own language, what they're seeking is intensification, and certainly that is what the council believes will be the case. Thank you.
So to bring that site forward, are there any specific infrastructure requirements, and are they costed?
There's no specific infrastructure requirements necessary to bring that site forward. There's obviously investment in the arch structures themselves to bring forward the ELSIS components.
And in terms of the mechanisms to ensure we've got a comprehensive and coordinated approach to development with the infrastructure requirements, we've got guidelines 3 and 4 in the policy. Does the council consider that is sufficient to ensure there's a comprehensive and coordinated approach to the development?
I think looking at those development requirements again, obviously they have to be read in conjunction with the employment policies which they refer to in terms of ELSIS and SIL. I think there's definitely enough within the policies and the within the site allocation to coordinate uses between the ELSIS and the SIL.
And what level of interest have we got in development on that site, and what's the land ownership situation?
The majority of the open land is owned by Network Rail. I'm sure the Arch Company will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the Arch Company have an interest in the arches. Again, maybe the Arch Company could clarify whether that's a long lease or whether it's ownership.
Yeah, if I just come in on that point. So the Arch Company have a 150-year lease over all of the land and the arches. The land, which is currently used for infrastructure works, I believe it's a lease, I think, till 2027. It was always ultimately to finish the current kind of infrastructure, and then that then comes back to our client. At that point, they'll have full control of the site, which is part of this sort of the kind of process about future use.
So in terms of bringing this site forward.
Apologies. I just wanted to clarify that in terms of land ownership.
It's possible to, I think, I think it's part of the land, sorry. As you go through the arches, I think there's 2 parcels. I think it comes back as, I think, a sort of maybe a hectare, and then I think the land to the north is there, and we could provide a ownership map, I think, post hearing, apologies, which clarifies the exact demise that we're coming back.
So just to clarify to the inspectors, I think part of the site is owned. In fact, all of the site is owned by Network Rail, but part of the site will be retained in Network Rail ownership with no leasehold arrangements, and then a northern part of the site, which includes the arches, the small space of land between the arches, and then the northern arches is leased to the arch company, as far as I understand. But maybe there's maybe we can provide some clarity to the inspectors.
Thank you. I think if it's possible to have a little bit of a plan that just illustrates that, it might just make it a little bit clearer for our benefit.
If I may, this was an issue that was discussed during week one, in particular in relation to the split between the sort of the ELSIS and the SIL. And I thought it was we very clearly set out how the SIL is already in strategic industrial operational use by Network Rail, and certainly all the conversations I've had with Network Rail are that they need it for their long-term improvement plans across the southern London network that they manage. And the northern component is on that leasehold to the Arch Company, and that corresponds with the division between SIL and ELSIS. It's a helpful reminder to officers of the council. We do have an outstanding statement of common ground anticipated from Network Rail, which I appreciate the inspectors have had sight of now that we are past the 4th of July. The council will take away as an action to pursue the signature of that statement of common ground. That should add further clarity to this matter, I would hope.
Thank you. Yes, I recall the discussion, how the council explained that the ELSIS and the SIL were discrete parcels. That's why they could be a dual designation. I think if it's possible to have a little bit of a diagram, some visual map that's appended to the statement of common ground, I think that might just clear that one up very, very easily. Thank you. So in terms of the planning status of this site, haven't got any consents on this site as of yet, have we? Any pre-applications and that sort of progress towards?
Nothing so far, no. Although it's sort of complicated by the nature of strategic industrial land and the activities that can go on in strategic industrial land. Obviously, it's currently being used for operational use by Network Rail, and is clearly within one of those categories of strategic industrial locations. So I think that's why we've sort of said it is deliverable within the first 5 years, because it is essentially being used. But nevertheless, I think, you know, the council does concede that, particularly on within the arches, you know, we haven't had a planning application coming forward, or you know, to improve and locate employment uses within those arches.
I think if I can just very briefly add, I mean, Network Rail have very clearly expressed to the council that their sort of short to medium term plans to continue to utilise the site for their own strategic infrastructure sort of support purposes. The council would contend, and this is in part response to the Greater London Authority's comments, the council would contend that should and when that operational requirements cease, the strategic industrial location component of the site remains an appropriate and suitable location for strategic industrial uses appropriate to that designation, and indeed provides an opportunity for intensification. I believe the Bermondsey Dive Under study submitted to the examination sort of speaks to the other similar types of uses and intensified uses that have gone in immediately to the northwest of this site on part of the wider Bermondsey Dive Under location that extends into neighbouring borough of Southwark. So the council contends there are genuine viable opportunities for the site to become something else within the strategic industrial location context and deliver intensification. I make that point, or labour that point, because that's been a requirement from the Greater London Authority. Many thanks.
So in terms of the delivery timescales, I'm going to look to the Arch Company. Do you have any comments on the timescale?
It's currently envisaged. The lease handback is, it's a fixed endpoint. It's self dependent on lease handback from Network Rail for the land component that is within their control. So it will all come forward comprehensively at that point in time. So I guess realistically, I think for the component, as we'll give the demise plan and post inquiry, that would likely be 2027, I believe. But again, we can clarify the exact lease date.
Because we're still looking at the site being deliverable within years 1 to 10, with a start on site years 1 to 5.
Well, again, as I've said, the complication here is that the land designated as strategic industrial land is effectively being used as strategic industrial land. So once we designate the site as strategic industrial land, it will be delivered within the 1 to 5 year period. I think forgive me, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Arch Company are effectively saying that in terms of the ELSIS component, their lease will be transferred 27, and then clearly there'll be pre-application discussions and planning application, etc. So that may then fall into the 5 to 10 years or 6 to 10 year period.
Yes, that sounds sort of, I think, logical. And I think just to sort of tie in, I think, kind of reference to the wider parcel of the Bermondsey Dive Under, which is within Southwark. Our client currently has sort of applications in on a large part of that land, which is a bigger sort of land parcel. And I think sitting straddling across 2 local authorities, again, they kind of see, and I think taking a market agency advice, the respective sites have clear roles. Because I think Southwark has independent access; it can take high vehicles. This component has, as is noted, but I think by the GLA, more constraints. And I know there's been there's been a lot of discussion through the process about the adequacy of that access. So I think it kind of leads back to just ensuring that ultimately there's flexibility that this can be delivered, because if if the uses don't align with ultimately the vehicular need, it's going to be kind of constrained.
And in terms of the proposed combined SIL, ELSIS, and its compatibility in relationship to Silwood Street, is it compatible with the character of Silwood Street?
Again, we kind of touched upon this at the previous matter. It's not unusual for strategic industrial land in Lewisham and elsewhere in London to be immediately adjacent to residential properties. It's part and parcel of being an urban central borough. We have examples of that elsewhere within the borough. I think the useful thing here is that we do have the opportunity to contain some of the heavier industrial uses within the centre of the site, and there is a natural gradation, dare I say, with the Silwood Street development, which is employment and mezzanine on the ground floor and residential above directly onto Silwood Street. Then we have the ELSIS designation with the arches providing, again, a buffer to that, and then we have the kind of core strategic industrial land component, which is sandwiched between the two railway lines. So we feel that that provides that appropriate buffer. I mean, there is no denying that you have to access the site via one of the arches, and there is a height restriction on that. But again, I think, as we said in matter 7 or 8, that's not an uncommon situation in Lewisham either, and that is the same situation to access Surrey Canal industrial sill location, where you have railway bridges either side of Surrey Canal Road, essentially, with approximately the same height clearance as well. So, yeah, so we feel that it is an appropriate location.
So that's quite a clear explanation of how you envisage the site to be developed. Does that do the development requirements and development guidelines encapsulate that? Do you feel that there's enough guidance for future occupiers and users?
Well, healthily, in terms of the first buffer, dare I say, the Silwood Street development is currently being constructed. So, and in fact, that's nearing completion. So that then provides the frontage onto the residential street there, with the employment uses and mezzanine level on the ground floor and residential above. We've also obviously got the ELSIS designation, which within the policies is quite clear in terms of what would be acceptable there. I think through the development management process, we can discuss within that ELSIS designation appropriate uses, but I don't think we'd be looking for, and I'm not sure the Arch Company would be looking for, heavy kind of industrial uses within those railway arches. And then we have the, as I said, the SIL designation, which could accommodate that heavy. So I think we're fairly content that it is clear through the designation and through the policies that that will be managed in that way. And obviously the development management process is there as well to help aid that conversation.
Yes, I was just looking in terms of the development requirements and the guidelines, and whether what you've just explained to us is fully covered, and whether any additional guidelines were necessary in there to assist with understanding the logic behind what you've just explained to us.
We can certainly look at that again and put in development guideline to clearly explain that, yes.
The Arch Company?
Yes, thank you. Just to quickly come in on that point, I think it's at point 4 within the policy, which notes about industrial uses being limited to those being suited to the site. Correct me, apologies, I've got the not the latest draft. I think just coming back to the core characteristics and principle of the SIL as defined by the London Plan, it's quite explicit in that the SIL is for those activities by virtue of their scale, noise, operation and/or vehicular movements can cause tensions with other land users. And I think once you start restricting back the types of use, vehicular movements, in essence, that's a SIL use. I think it's more, in my personal opinion, more of an a locally more kind of you'd expect to see an analysis or locally significant site. And I know this has been, apologies for going over old ground, but I think it's been a point through that we do contend. I think those controls actually move it. Is it, ultimately not being, relevant to a SIL? I think it's quite rare for those type of, policy requirements to be at, an additional layer above that of, the key kind of SIL London Plan E5.
The council want to make any final comment?
I think we're, in terms of point 4, what we're doing there is recognising the constraints of the residential access, and what we're saying is that servicing with large vehicles may not be appropriate. I think we've obviously discussed this in great lengths with the GLA, and they seem to be happy with the designation of the strategic industrial land that is expressed through our statement common ground. There's also recognition that strategic industrial land is changing and there is a more diverse range. Clearly, the land is operating as strategic industrial land at the moment, but I think there's also a degree of, or there's a recognition that there are areas of strategic industrial land that may operate slightly differently in the future, servicing the central activity zone area and also servicing the services as we point out. So the nature of having large articulated lorries servicing these industrial locations is significantly changing, particularly on that, as I said, that last mile servicing the sort of type of location. I think that's reflected in the conversations that we've had with the GLA.
Any final points on this allocation before we move to the modifications? Modifications then, please.
There is a modification identified under PD11. That's at MO 110. However, that modification is essentially a sort of a legacy modification now. It responded to the comments raised at Regulation 19 by the GLA. And any modification that may have resulted would have been subject to the findings of first the supplementary employment land evidence that was produced under EB 24 LC1 and subsequently the BDU study itself. As neither of those generated site-specific modifications, that there is no modification required. Sorry if that makes sense in a roundabout way.
So just to be clear, modification 110 is not required now.
The inspectors can strike it through, yes.
Right, I think that's an opportunity for a comfort break, and it's 11:10. So shall we take a few moments? 11:25. Is that suitable to everyone? So we'll adjourn until 11:25. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back. We'll resume the hearing. We're going to move on to site LNA SA3, Evelyn Court at Surrey Canal Road. Just turning to the council first then, please. The background to this site allocation, it was a site allocation in the local plan 2013, the employment land study in the London Schlar. It wasn't previously suitable for residential and it's now suitable. So what's changed in terms of this particular proposed allocation?
Yeah, so this site is one of 3 sites that are designated as strategic industrial land, which we are proposing to redesignate as ELSIS with the ability to co-locate residential above. It should be noted that the site itself, part of the site which is owned by the council, is essentially vacant. The other part of the site, which is occupied by a building, has been vacant for some time and has a prior approval to convert part of the office block into residential. When we were looking at our employment land study and review, we looked at the potential for this site to be redesignated on the grounds that it wasn't performing a strategic industrial land function, that it did have the prior approval, and that the Bermondsey dive under could be used to compensate for the loss of strategic industrial land, whilst the designation would be employment led, and therefore we would create effectively new employment floor space, as well as providing residential above. The landowner expressed an interest to develop the site through the call for sites exercises, and has also been engaging in pre-application process with the council. The council is in partnership with the landowner to develop the site comprehensively. We're at advanced pre-application stages, and my understanding is that the planning application will be submitted in the autumn. Apologies, the net residential units, which we have increased to 161, and the gross employment floor space effectively reflects the latest advanced pre-application discussions.
So just so I'm clear for my notes, the net residential's gone up to 162, and the employment floor space reflects the pre-application. Is that both elements of reflecting in the pre-application, or is it just one or the other?
I believe so, yes.
So the increase to the net residential up to 162, is that going to have any effect on delivery of the site?
No.
So there was a representation requesting slightly more residential and slightly less employment. In terms of how you've derived those those figures. If you could just explain a little bit more on how you've got to the figures and comment on the alternative suggestion in that representation that wanted slightly more residential and slightly less employment.
Yes, I think the representation is from the landowner, if I'm not mistaken. But obviously, that has since been superseded by the pre-application discussions that we've been having. Obviously, as an ELSIS, this should be employment-led, which we've reiterated to the landowner through the application discussions, which he's taken on board, which reflects the employment figures that we've got before us, but also the 161, 162. We'll have to clarify that. Reflects where we are again with the scale and massing of the development, which is now further advanced, and officers are supportive of, albeit we'll obviously have to go through committee.
Now, you mentioned there was a prior approval, so in terms of keeping it employment led, what's to prevent that prior approval coming forward now if it's in place? Is it a prior approval for residential?
It is prior approval for residential relating to the existing building. It's a very odd prior approval, which I think is a prior approval for this, if I'm correct, the second and fourth floor of the building. It's very odd, which is why it hasn't been implemented. So the landowner has no intention of implementing that. As I said, the landowner is working in partnership with the council to bring forward a comprehensive scheme on both pieces of land.
And in terms of the timescale for that full scheme, when are you expecting the planning application and sort of determination process?
Yeah, so we're expecting the planning application in autumn of this year. We would target a 6-month determination period. The site is a relatively small, discrete site. There isn't any particular significant issues with Section 106, key infrastructure required, that type of thing. So that would be fairly quick. So we've indicated that this could be delivered within the 5-year period, at the end of the 5-year period.
And if it's a relatively small site with relatively limited constraints, is there any opportunity to accelerate that scheme to bring it forward, to develop it quicker than the end of year 5?
There may be. I think, forgive me, we were just taking a kind of fairly cautious approach in terms of the trajectory. But yeah, I mean, it is a small site. There isn't any significant infrastructure constraints, so it could conceivably be delivered. But I think we've kept it within the 5-year period, but pushed it towards the end of that 5-year period, simply reflecting that we're only at advanced pre-application stage. But I do acknowledge, and we would very much hope that it is delivered earlier.
So as part of the discussions in the pre-app stage, are there any viability concerns that crop up? Has the landowner expressed any viability issues?
I'm not aware of any viability issues that have cropped up. As I said, the council is working in partnership with the developer. I think I'd have to come back to the inspectors on that. I'm not aware of any viability concerns. I think one of the things that we were pushing for is a higher target of affordable housing on the site, and that's my only hesitation with that. If I could take that away and can confirm that.
Yes, please, if you would, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, moving on to any modifications do we have for this particular site, LNA 3?
Yes, there are two. The first of those, they're both contained substantially within submitted document PD11. The first of those, MO105, deletes the site title Evelyn Court at Surrey Canal Road Strategic Industrial Location and replaces it with Evelyn Court Locally Significant Industrial Site. The second, MO249, has been further updated, and that relates to the housing land supply capacity, and that's the referred to figure of 161.
Thank you. Anything else on site number 3? No? Okay, let's turn over to site number 15, which is the Albany Theatre. So again, to the council, in terms of the background to this particular site allocation and the site area and capacity assumptions, please.
Yes, in terms of the site allocation, the landowner expressed an interest to develop the site through the call for sites exercise in 2018 and the regulation 18 consultation in 2021. We have been in communication with the landowner about the redevelopment and reprovision, I want to add, of the Albany Theatre. In terms of the development potential, we haven't had any pre-application discussions with them yet, formal pre-application discussions with them yet. So we have used the density assumptions that we have previously used as the methodology for calculating the uses on the site. It is in an opportunity area, it is in a central location, PTAL 6, which would generate a density of 450 dwellings per hectare. However, we have applied a sensitivity test to that and adjusted the density from central down to urban, from 450 to 355, to reflect its context and also to reflect the nearby conservation area. Also mindful that the theatre is very much wanting to remain on the site and wanting to be present in the future. So we've looked at the percentage of uses there to accommodate that. So that spits out effectively 119 net residential units, a small proportion of employment floor space, and then 3,000 square metres of main town centre floor space, which is effectively to re-provide the theatre. There's a net gain of 758 square metres of employment floor space and a net gain of around about 600 square metres for the theatre.
And in terms of the physical site constraints, what have we got on the site, and are they able to be overcome through development management process?
Yes, there is an open space which is associated with the theatre to the rear of the site. I think there may be some tree planting there, albeit, forgive me, I don't know the nature or the quality of the trees within that open space. But there isn't any significant concerns in terms of infrastructure. I guess the only issue that we will have in the redevelopment of the site, and I think it's fair to say that we haven't yet discussed this with the Albany Theatre, is if they want to retain continuation of the theatre premises during construction, how is that achieved? And that's something that we haven't yet engaged with the Albany Theatre on. Just to be absolutely clear, that the reason the Albany Theatre want to redevelop the site and create a new theatre is to update and provide better theatre provision on the site, but also to secure the long-term future for the theatre. So it's absolutely essential that this site is allocated.
Yes, there've been representations talking about the space and the green space. So, are they specifically factored into the development guidelines and requirements?
The open space was factored into the capacity figures that we've provided. So that element of the site had been removed and then the rest had been calculated.
Yes, and development requirement number 4 is about the new and improved public realm as part of a public realm strategy. So is that public realm strategy going to be something that's part of the planning application in due course, or does it sit separately as another document?
It doesn't sit separately. It'll be part of the planning application. I know there's been representation about the retention of the garden to the rear. And whilst ordinarily that might be the approach, I think we are reluctant to have that as a development requirement simply because of the phasing of the site and the continuation of the theatre premises. So, you know, we are clear that there needs to be public realm as part of this site, but what we're not doing is essentially safeguarding the rear of the site as that public realm.
So we've also got reference to the site lying within an area of archaeological priority. Is that an extensive area of archaeological priority, and would it affect the delivery of the site?
It wouldn't necessarily affect the delivery of the site. We reference that there. We've got new APAs which have been updated, which are now on our system and effectively just flag up when any site is within that designation. I mean, what that requires is essentially an investigation to be undertaken. We don't envisage in this site that there'll be any particular issues below ground that would hold up delivery.
And in terms of the infrastructure that's required, has any assessment been made about the infrastructure and its costs to deliver the site?
There hasn't been assessment of the infrastructure requirements, but we don't envisage any strategic infrastructure being required to deliver the site.
So looking towards the timescale and the rate of delivery and its realism. I think the plan says 11 to 15. We had a modification, but we've got a revised trajectory. So if we could just come to where we're at now, please, if the council could just summarise where we've reached.
I think in the latest trajectory, we've got it in year 8 of the plan, 31, 32.
And I see the first development requirement is about having the site master plan. Has that been part of the pre-application discussions with the landowner?
The requirement for a master plan, I mean, it's a fairly kind of small site, so that master planning exercise will be fairly limited in its scope. We haven't had kind of formal pre-application discussions with the theatre, although we have had conversations with them regarding this site. But as I said, the master planning process will be fairly limited given the scope of the site.
Do we have any statement of common ground with the landowner on this one?
No, mainly because of the anticipated delivery. Obviously, we were focusing our efforts on the landowners for the first 5 years, so we don't have a statement of common ground with them.
So now it's moved to year 8. That's sort of a later conversation that you might have with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worth saying that in terms of the landowner and the organisation, the council obviously works in partnership with the Albany Theatre constantly on cultural programmes, etc. So we have a very strong working relationship, but we haven't sought a statement of common ground for the purposes of the local plan, simply because we were concentrating our efforts on the 5-year land supply.
And does the council have any concerns about viability of this particular allocation?
Well, I think there's always going to be slight concerns about the viability of re-providing a new theatre, but I think the allocation and the mixed-use nature of the allocation reflects the kind of viability of the site. You know, obviously we are looking at co-locating residential to cross-subsidize the reprovision of the theatre space.
Just in terms of the viability assessment, obviously the larger sites have been assessed separately. I just wondered, obviously there are standard typologies, we'll come on to that in the viability session, but what category would this fall into? Would it be small scale, mixed use, or just mixed use? Just it would be useful just to have a reference point.
Yes, I think this would be small scale mixed use given the size of the site.
And in terms of the modifications then, please, from the council.
My apologies, just moving to the correct screen. There are two modifications. They are in order within document PD11. The first reference MO 254 that relates to the housing land supply trajectory, and the modification seeks to adjust that so that the site appears in years 6 to 10 as per the discussion. The subsequent modification, MO 255, relates to supporting text paragraph 15.90 development requirements 2, and adds additional text so that it reads retention or appropriate reprovision of the Albany Theatre on the site in line with policy CI1, safeguarding and securing community infrastructure, and has regard to the agent of change principle.
Thank you. Anything final on the allocation number 15, the Albany Theatre? Let's move on to the next group of sites or site allocations with planning consent. So we're going to be particularly interested in the details of that planning consent and where it's got to in terms of discharge of conditions, section 106s, and moving towards delivery as part of the next group of sites. So we're going to look at LNA SA9, which is the Surrey Canal Triangle, and it may be the renewal group want to come in for some discussions on this particular one.
Yeah, so I can start with the history of the site. So obviously this is an existing site allocation in the core strategy 2011 as a mixed-use employment location. There was a previous planning application approved on the site. Subsequently, there was a new planning application submitted for the renewal land. Should just indicate that there are effectively two principal landowners within the site, So there is renewal, there is Millwall, and there's also the council, sorry, three. The renewal land has been subject to a further planning application, which has a resolution to approve. We are negotiating the Section 106 agreement with the multiple parties. I believe, I'm looking across at the participants here, that we are just about to sign that off, which is great news. So that's where we are in terms of that. It is a hybrid application, so it's part outline planning application, part detail for the first phase, which is 600 units, which is a fairly discrete parcel to the triangular parcel to the east of the site, which we're hoping that we can effectively crack on with ASAP. It's worth saying also that obviously Millwall, in negotiation with the council, Millwall have a long lease on the council's land. They also have aspirations to redevelop part of the site. There's plans to extend the stadium and the facilities within the stadium, and also provide some additional housing. So in terms of the allocation and the accommodation, effectively the net residential units reflect a sort of combination of approaches, and apologies for the complexity here. The part of the net residential units, approximately 3,500, reflects the approval in terms of the planning consent, and then 597 of which is based on a mathematical calculation for the remainder of the site, the developable site, which is excluding the stadium, for the land which is controlled by the council and Millwall. In terms of the non-residential floor space, I just want to raise an error within the site allocation. So obviously we have been working towards the planning approval and adjusting the figures to reflect then the net increase of the renewal application and the Millwall council side of things, but unfortunately that hasn't worked its way through to the non-residential component. So the non-residential component essentially just reflects the Millwall permission, which doesn't then leave any scope for the extension of the stadium, the associated facilities. So I apologise for that. The council's going to have to go away and essentially provide the inspectors with that calculation. There will be a kind of increase in non-residential floor space on that site allocation to reflect the aspirations of Millwall, the extension to the stadium and the associated kind of facilities, conference suites, etc. that surround that.
Thank you. So just taking us right back to the top of all of that information, resolution and almost at signing stage. And when we say almost at signing stage, are we very close? Are we days, weeks, months close?
Weeks. The Section 106 is agreed, bar a few kind of words here and there, but it has taken a long time, and the primary reason why it has taken a long time is because the funding position for the station has changed since the time of the resolution to approve. And so we've been working very hard with the council, with TfL, with the GLA in order to make sure that the station is deliverable. So the Section 106 now fully reflects that. The application is going back to committee in the next 2 weeks. We're just between two dates, but it will be in July. And that is because in order to make sure that the additional funding is there for the station, there's had to be an amendment to the affordable housing provision on one phase. So, so it's policy compliant across the whole scheme, apart from on one particular phase, which is phase 3. It's not in the first phase, so it's down the track a bit, and that releases the money for the station. So that has been why the Section 106 has taken quite a bit of time, because the HIF funding, which was in place at the time of the resolution to approve, or we thought the HIF funding was on the cusp of being in place, has fallen away. So as soon as it goes back to committee at the end of July, it's fine. All issues with second staircases have been resolved with the GLA and the council in between that time. So as soon as it's been to committee, it goes to the GLA for the 14-day referral process, and hopefully it can be signed at that point. So we're expecting the Section 106 to be signed in August.
Thank you. That's helpful. So in terms of the phasing of the overall site, how many phases have we got, and how many are sort of consented, and how many have we've got to find further details for reserve matters, etc.
The phasing for the renewal land is split into 5 phases. We have the reserved matter, sorry, the detailed permission subject to the signing of the Section 106 for phase 1, which is, as I said, the triangular plot to the east of the site. And then phase 2 will essentially be immediately adjacent to the station to the southeast of the site. The outline planning application is a fairly detailed outline planning application, dare I say, but clearly there's further reserved matters to be worked through on that phase. And then it moves on to 3, 4, 5 in terms of the phasing. We can certainly provide a phasing plan to the inspectors of that application. In terms of the Millwall/council land, that's a little bit more uncertain in terms of the phasing, and that's reflective in the trajectory. There is an ambition and desire to obviously crack on with that, but as of yet, we've had pre-application discussions with them previously on the stadium expansion and associated facilities, but as one can imagine, the pandemic hit clubs quite hard, and therefore there's essentially a bit of a regrouping there. They're still keen to progress with that, and I know that we've just recently signed a new lease with them, so we're expecting pre-application discussions to recommence with them soon.
And statements of common ground, we've got one with the renewal group, and the other with Millwall. Where exactly has that got to? I think it was supposed to be coming in shortly.
I think it's been submitted, it has been published, yep. I'm not sure if it, I don't think the statement of common ground flags the error, but we have had reps to essentially say that there is an error, and that error we will go in and correct.
Renewal Group.
Just to say, in terms of the housing delivery of phase one, we're very comfortable with the trajectory, and Renewal are very committed to phase one and the continued development right across the 5 phases. So we've talked to the council about the trajectory, and we're very happy with the figures that are in the trajectory.
Can I just add to give just a little bit of detail here? I think that year 3, 300 units and that pipeline is absolutely realistic. Renewal have been investing in this site for 18 years, so we would like to crack on as soon as we possibly can. The phase 1 site is 24 existing industrial units. We own 23 of them. There's one that we still have to reach agreement with the willing seller, and I think he's been waiting for a signed 106 and a planning permission to be issued. So we're reasonably optimistic that we can crack on as soon as the planning permission is issued.
We got any planning performance agreements in place for this allocation?
I believe so, yes.
Most definitely.
So as a coordinated approach across the different landowners, what mechanisms are being used to bring forward the site as a whole and that vision for the allocation as a totality?
Yeah, we have got an adopted SPD which covers this site in its entirety. That sets out the working in partnership with all parties, essentially the key principles for the site and its delivery.
And from TfL's representation, they'd refer to bus interchange and stands and stops and circulation, and they were seeking development requirements to be changed. Is that something the council has considered?
Yeah, we've considered that, and that is accepted. I would note that we've picked up development requirement 8, paragraph 15.64.8. We're happy with the insertions that TfL want to make. There is, however, a reference to a walking and cycling bridge within that requirement, which unfortunately we're sort of scratching our heads a little bit at. So I wonder if I can take that away and understand what that reference is. I think the word bridge is effectively a rogue word that's been put in there because there is no walking and cycling bridge that I can think of within that site. So if it's agreeable to TfL and other parties, we'd like to take that away and just make sure that we've got the exact wording correct there.
Yes, the renewal group.
Yes, just to say we're happy with that and to confirm that the amendments that TfL have requested, Renewal are comfortable with those, and indeed all those elements are within the section 106. Apart from the bridge. which neither the council or TfL or GLA is requesting. And yeah, we think it's a wording anomaly.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think we'll clear up the detail of that one if you take that away. Thank you.
Just as a helpful, yeah, I can confirm that the bridge is a mistake, that links could be an appropriate word to replace it with, but we can, yeah, come back on that.
Are there any further requirements from Network Rail about the railway access improvements? Anything further on that?
Not aware of anything further.
And we'd also had reps from the CPRE and Sport England relation to trees and sports and playing fields reprovided that Sport England were talking about. Is that relative to this particular site?
There is, I think this is in relation to the football club and the sports facilities that they have within their site. And yes, I mean, our intention is to, reprovide those. And I believe that is the intention of Millwall as well. Obviously, we'll have to get further down the line in terms of pre-application discussions to see how that would take place on the site.
Just in terms of viability, and I appreciate there are different components and different sort of phases of the development. You mentioned that funding had fallen through. Presumably that new funding has been secured to facilitate the development.
What happened with the funding, just to give you a little bit of the backdrop, is that the GLA applied to the Housing Infrastructure Fund for a variety of improvements on the East London line. The station was one. The station is the third built. At that time, the cost of a station was circa 30 million. So off the top of my head, that was around December 2021. I think by the time we got to April 2022, the inflation had happened and we were being told it was 70 million. So the cost of a station just massively accelerated. So from the developer's perspective, although there's lots of stakeholders involved in this, we have been told that the HIF funding hasn't entirely funded away. There is some money there, but everybody, to put it colloquially, everybody's been told that they have to contribute and they have to chip in. So when Paula talked you through the reduction of affordable on phase 2, that gives, I think off the top of my head, a 17 million contribution from the developer. That's all going towards making up to that. I haven't got the contractors next to me, so I'm not sure what the cost is now, but it's more in the region of 70 million. So I think there's a combined pot earmarked.
now. And it's just to say that, as you can imagine, with the development of this scale, there has been revised viability appraisals continually through that process. They've been scrutinised by the GLA's viability team, via the council's independent viability advisors, and the viability appraisal, which sits alongside the Section 106, which is about to be signed, is agreed by all parties, and the developer funding is for the station delivery, to ensure the station delivery is within that. There are then various affordable housing review mechanisms that continue throughout the course of the development in line with the GLA guidance. So it will continue to be assessed from a viability perspective with a view to increasing the affordable housing as we continue through the development. But it has been fully scrutinised in terms of its deliverability.
Does the viability appraisal cover the whole site, you know, the outline site, or just the first phase of it?
The whole site which is renewal, so it excludes the council and the Millwall land, which is not part of the planning application where the Section 106 is to be signed. So it covers the whole red line of the planning application.
Okay, so that information really be more detailed and supersede the whole plan viability assessment for that part of the site. What was the conclusion in terms of the remainder of the site, in terms of whole plan viability? I don't think it's specifically mentioned as a site, but what typology would it be classed under? Actually, I think it might be specific viability assessment 31, site 31, for Canal Triangle,
That's correct, yes.
which is showing that the site's not viable for any circumstances, I don't think.
I think obviously this reflects the nature of the high level work that the viability assessment and the assumptions made looking at, you know, overall policies is essentially obviously that's superseded by the more detailed work that Renewal have done. There is no further detailed work that has been undertaken by Millwall at this stage. But I suspect in terms of looking at funding and the extension of stadium, they will be looking for other sources of funding and not necessarily looking at the entirety of that cost being subsidised by development.
It's just how the remainder of the site is likely to come forward, given it doesn't sort of stack up in its own right in terms of viability. Presumably the residential component would have been taken into account in the viability
Definitely. Obviously, it would. I'm just pointing out, being realistic, that the cost of a new slash extended stadium of the scale that Millwall have in terms of their aspirations with associated conference suites, etc., will not be covered by the residential component in its entirety, and therefore other funding will have to be sourced by the football club.
And are you confident that funding could be secured? Maybe more of a question for the Renewal Group.
Well, Renewal are not party to the extension of the football stadium and their land. Ongoing discussions with the club suggest that they are confident. So that's the intelligence that the council has.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, modifications then, please.
Unsurprisingly, and I'm going to take a big breath here, given the amount of hard work that's been undertaken between the development partners and the council, there are, and the statements of common ground, there are quite a few modifications proposed. So within document PD 11, there is a single modification, so I will start with that before moving to the, I believe, 9 modifications that are in the document you have before you today as an addendum. So starting with MO treble 11, that seeks to amend paragraph 15.64, bullet point 6. And that responds to, I believe, representations submitted at Regulation 19, and it's the final sentence of that bullet point, and it deletes the words facilitate, and that sentence now reads, the site must also contribute towards the delivery of Cycleway 10. Another deep breath, if I may. Moving to the addendum that was submitted today, and which I think fundamentally covers the agreed positions that emerge from the statements of common ground and the revised housing land supply trajectory. Starting with modification reference MO 288. That aligns the new local plan with the housing trajectory anticipated delivery. So the net residential units increase from 4089 to 4097. Moving on, modification MO 298. That is to paragraph 15.63, and that I believe relates to a specific part of the site, and it replaces the figure of 26 with 27. So that sentence reads, there are 27 existing residential units located on the site. So a factual correction. Moving on, modification MO 299 relates to paragraph 15.61. That replaces the word floor space, which follows 3,518 residential, replaces the word floor space with units. And the sentence continues, and a variety of non-residential floor space, non-residential being a new insertion. Modification MO 300, which is paragraph 15.64. I think that's criterion or bullet point 6. Apologies, that's a repeat of the modification I've already discussed. The site must also facilitate strike through, contribute towards new insertion, the delivery of cycleway 10. Moving on, modification MO301. That is paragraph 15.65, criterion 2. So new text, a new east-west route, new text inserted along the route of the old Surrey Canal, which links, and the deletion of the word linking. Modification 302, which is paragraph 15.65, criterion 6b. Strike through of the words walking and cycling routes and introduction of a new capital. So that sentence now starts: access to the new railway station at Surrey Canal Road and South Bermondsey Station. Sentence continues. Modification 303, sorry, MO303. That relates to paragraph 15.65, criterion 7, and there are deleted words within that. The deletions are the unlisted historic buildings at Ilderton Road, and I believe that also encompasses a spelling mistake there. Moving on, connectivity with the gas holders on Old Kent Road in the Borough of Southwark, full stop, deletion of should also be considered. Almost there. Modification MO304, paragraph 15.65, criterion 9, introducing new words. So that sentence now reads: Transport for London and Network Rail should be consulted beyond statutory obligations on development and design options where their ownerships are affected by proposals. And finally, modification MO305, that is paragraph 15.64, criterion 2, and that's the insertion of the words on site. So development of the council owned land must capitalise on the opportunities presented by Millwall FC Stadium, including options for its on site reprovision and expansion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anything final on that side? Okay, let's move on to LNA SA 18, and I think Bellway and Peabody Homes have been sitting waiting patiently for this site. Thank you for your patience. So I'm going to look at the planning status first, please, and if the council could just give us an overview of what's consented, what's coming, what's in discussion, and if, as and when necessary, Bellway Peabody Homes, if you want to chip in. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of Sun Wharf MEL, this is an existing site allocation 2013 for a mixed use employment location. That designation has been continued forward into the local plan. The site is effectively in two ownerships. One is the Cockpit Arts organisation, and one is Bellway and Peabody Homes. There are two approved applications covering the site in terms of the Cockpit Arts. That application is essentially for the refurbishment of the building and improvements to effectively creative employment floor space, which I believe has now been completed. And then we have an application which was consented in August of last year. On the other piece of land which has been approved, the Section 106 has been signed, the second staircase issue has been resolved, and we are hoping that that site can be delivered. And just in terms of the development potential, that is effectively reflective of those applications that have been approved.
Yes, thank you, inspectors. A point of clarification, there are, on the wider site allocation, 3 separate land holdings. There's my client's site at Sun Wharf, Cockpit Arts, the second site, and there's also the Network Rail part of the site as well. In relation to the second stair core, as part of that consent, there is a 19-story tower there that has, as part of the approval, has a second stair core in. But there are other buildings, smaller buildings, 7 and 8 stories, which have 1 stair core and more than 18 metres. They currently have 1 stair core. So some amendments will be needed in order to, to bring forward the site in light of changing building regulations and all other matters.
And in terms of those amendments, is that something that's being progressed at the moment, or is that part of a programme?
There's certainly behind the scenes discussions and looking at those, but that's an ongoing, ongoing discussions.
Now, I know we've got a modification on this one, which refers to MO115, refers to planning status, has a resolution to approve. Have we now moved on from that, or is that still?
Yes, we have moved on from that, yes.
And in terms of the delivery, how realistic is that? I think Savills hearing statement, you're referring to the first 5 years and completion likely after year 5. Is that still the position?
I think the fundamental message is all about flexibility because of various building regulation changes, etc. That's certainly that is a target and certainly can be delivered, but with greater flexibility, it could potentially be delivered faster. When we refer to flexibility, it's owing to, I guess, in terms of flexibility of different residential types, looking at other statement of common ground, elsewhere in other site allocations. I note that there's one sort of paragraph which says that the term residential uses is inclusive of all types of accommodation, including conventional housing, student housing, co-living products and specialist housing. The appropriate types and mix of accommodation will be determined through the development management process. So I think the bottom line is really just about flexibility to ensure that the delivery can happen.
Council like to comment?
Yes, just a point of clarity, really. I mean, obviously we have a planning consent. We're well versed in and have very much experience now of accommodating second staircases within existing planning applications, and can do that fairly swiftly. Certainly that flexibility is there. We can certainly come to an agreement incorporating the second staircase, and then the council would be looking to the developers to crack on with their application.
I think sort of our assessment in terms of the route to the site being delivered is that there's probably need for further changes to the planning permission rather than simply introducing a second stair to the blocks which don't currently have one, and it's making sure that the site allocation contains enough flexibility in it to allow those changes to come forward, subject to the test of your development management policies as well, to allow the site to come into delivery.
And looking at viability and the impact of potential changes on the planning application and the timescales. Obviously, the developer's looking for flexibility in this, and I'm looking at the council in terms of what flexibility might there be within this allocation, and how would viability be potentially affected if there was to be a change.
I guess that depends on the flexibility that's being sought. I'm a little bit nervous about flexibility. It does sound like there might be a new application coming in with an increased scale density. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I think the council would be disappointed by that position, given that we have worked proactively with the developers for a number of years to get the site to the position that we're at the moment. If it's flexibility in terms of looking at discrete changes to the application to accommodate the second staircase, which we've done elsewhere within the borough on a number of schemes coming forward, then certainly. I know that the application was accompanied by a detailed viability assessment, which stated that the scheme was viable, with quite a high proportion of affordable housing. So, and I'm not aware of any evidence that the council's received to suggest that it's not viable. So, certainly we can, work with the developers to overcome the second staircase issue, and then again, council would be looking to the developers to crack on and build a scheme.
So just in terms of if there is to be another application, further application, what would be the effect on the time scales?
It would be a similar timescales. That is, within the next 5 years, in terms of housing delivery.
Because I know the trajectory's got delivery down for 180 units in year 3 and 40 in year 4. But if we were to look at another application, is that going to compromise the delivery of 180 units in year 3? Just trying to look at the certainty and potential for change if there may.
I mean, again, just from a council's perspective, you know, if the flexibility and changes are relatively, you know, contained, then, you know, that would be achievable. If there's more whole-scale changes, then we'd have to probably push that towards the end of the 5-year period.